Hello, hi, my name's Ren, and sometimes I draw stuff. I've been, like every so often, on a bit of a nostalgia trip recently, which made me go through some of my old art. And in the process, I found this old character design. The character originated in this marker drawing, and then I reused it and modified it slightly for this digital piece. I did that like a year later, I think. It's easily over a decade old by now, but I can't help but be fond of it. Even though I look back and I'm like, wow, I used to be way worse than I remember. And I thought it would be a fun little exercise to give the character a bit of a makeover, now that I'm a better artist and know a bit more about character design. Because the two drawings have such obviously different vibes, I decided to turn them into two separate characters with slightly different premises, but I'm keeping some of the basic design elements from the originals for both of them. And as a little treat for myself, I am also going to throw in a third design that's a bit more of a wild card. So let's get into it. I started with a design heavily based on the original marker drawing from 2013. I vaguely remembered that I wanted the character to have more regal vibes, kind of like a queen or a priestess, so I knew I wanted to go with something elegant and a bit fancier. I started out with silhouettes just to figure out the shape I wanted for her floor-length dress, and this was a great decision, honestly, because it basically delivered me a solution immediately. So most of the rest of the process was just kind of figuring out some details and then, of course, actually drawing out the design in a nice illustration. And because I don't want you to get bored while all that's happening, I wanted to use the moment to talk about the basic design elements I wanted to keep around for all of the designs that I mentioned a few moments ago. I wanted them to all have some recognizable similarities while still being very fundamentally different. There needed to be something to connect them, so they're a set, you know? First thing I knew I wanted to keep is the overall color scheme, the white, teal, and gold of it all. That was part of what drew me to revisit these drawings specifically, because it's not at all a color combination I would reach for organically if I was going to do a random character design now. Something about cool greens just kind of puts me off, even though I typically like them well enough when they're in a full piece of art that somebody else made, so those minty greens are not for me, and I also have some beef with orange that I don't know where it's coming from, but regardless, I just don't like these colors typically, so I wanted to branch out a bit. Beside the colors, I wanted to keep some form of jewelry for all of them, as well as the somewhat longer hair. It's not going to be the same for all of them. I feel like if I made that too short, it would just end up looking like a totally different character. And lastly, I wanted to keep the magical butterfly motif while keeping it more on the low-key side. Something I knew I wanted to explicitly not use was wings. While the character in the original has some fae elf vibes, I did not want wings. It felt too on the nose and I don't know, a bit too easy, the butterfly theme, wings. I can't explain it, but I knew I wasn't going to put them in there for any of them. Overall, this first design mostly feels like a faithful adaptation of the original drawing, expanding on the ideas more than really changing all that much. That's maybe not so surprising, given that this ancient drawing still appealed to me enough to want to revisit it now. But yeah, there's actually a lot of interesting character ideas spread across all of my old sketchbooks and like full pieces. I didn't really used to have characters. Instead, I would just make up new designs for every new drawing, or as was the case here, I'd just reuse an older design in a new context when I didn't feel like making up anything new. And nowadays, it's totally different. I mostly draw my OCs for everything, basically, which makes things easier and saves time in many ways, but it can be its own kind of struggle, because then I sometimes get caught up in whether or not they're perfectly suited for any given idea or illustration, if I should keep their design on model or if I should change it. There are pros and cons to everything, I suppose. But enough rambling. This design is almost done, and I'm just adding a few effects to the whole thing to get the right vibe across. This one is more simple because in part I am lazy, but also because the design is meant to be the focus, and the last thing I want is for a busy background to take the attention away from where it ought to be. One down, two more to go. After this first one, I sat down to work on the second design immediately. The short dress and the glowing butterflies in the digital drawing made me think kind of like magical girls, so I just ran with that. I love magical girls, I love the vibes, and they are definitely different enough from like a refined elf priestess that it was the perfect fit. I was really excited to get to work on that, and armed with all the enthusiasm, I then proceeded to run right into a metaphorical wall. After the first design went so smoothly, I didn't expect the second one to fight me all the way, but it did. That thing made me really work for it. I was doing sketch after sketch, all the while feeling like I knew what I wanted, but I was absolutely not getting that down on the canvas. It just never really looked right or interesting enough. And after I went on scribbling for a while, I decided to go and try silhouettes again because they had worked so well the first time. They did not help me much this time around, if I may be honest. They just left me as confused as before, just now with more visual options to choose from. One thing that really tripped me up was how to balance the hair with a big ribbon that I also wanted to include in the design. I don't know why, but one of my instincts when designing a magical girl is just to slap a comically oversized bow and ribbon somewhere in there. The thing is, though, I still wanted to keep the design somewhat simple and readable, and I also wanted to keep the long hair. I just like drawing long hair. So I had to figure out a way to include both while not making the whole design look overly busy. And that took a while. I kept going back and forth, trying to figure out a good placement for the bow and discarding different ideas that either looked stupid or made it look a bit too much like wings, which I didn't want, until I landed on placing it at the back of her head and also making it smaller. But for a while I got fixated on this one design aspect, and I tried to make it work over and over until I had to take a break and come back a few days later with fresh eyes. Ultimately, I didn't end up using the giant bow and ribbon after all. It just didn't work. I wanted the hair to be very visually important, being like this very bright, almost whitish gray. Like, it was supposed to be the focus, so the ribbon had to go. The journey to that final design was much longer than I had hoped, and I was so exhausted that I just kind of gave up on the whole thing in the coloring stage, and I didn't even bother to come up with some cool butterfly-related magic moves for her. Because it's very easy to draw, I just gave her some glowing goo and left it at that. I was very tired of looking at the whole thing, and I was done with it. I like to imagine that she'll get some more visually unique powers with the inevitable magical girl power-up that she will receive later in her career. Who knows? Maybe the giant, incredibly impractical ribbon I wanted to be in the design will also make an appearance there. We know how magical girl upgrades work. Sometimes they get sillier and sillier. But yeah, now in retrospect, I think it's interesting how the first design was very much dominated by white, and this one is a lot more heavy on the teal greenish color. So let's see how that shakes out for the final one. The third one, unlike the others, isn't directly based on any drawings, and as I mentioned, it is a bit more of a wild card. This one was a treat for me, especially after the second one was such a struggle. I just took the overall concept of a Fae adjacent character with magical butterflies, and then I designed something that fit more with what my taste is now. Like a design that I would naturally come up with today if you gave me this prompt of saying magical butterflies, these colors, these design elements, show me what you got. As you can see from the sketches already, over time my taste has changed quite a bit, and I'm currently a lot more into fairies or elves that are a bit more on the strange side. Still humanoid looking, but clearly not human at the same time. And hopefully that's something I managed to get across with the design accurately enough. Funnily, but perhaps not surprising, this design was by far the one that took the least time to put together, ultimately, start to finish. I knew I was not going to go with a winged fairy, so I spent some time pinning down how I wanted to communicate the otherness, this essence of strangeness I wanted the fairy to have. And first thing on that list of things I wanted to add is giving the character big, round, buggy eyes. I just love putting those on characters. I think they're kind of cute to me in like a creepy, cute kind of way. Next up, I knew I wanted to design most of the body in such a way that it could blend in with a forest environment with foliage, making it easier for the character to disappear and move around unseen by mortal eyes. And finally, I knew I needed to do something about the hair. I wanted to make sure it wasn't the same as in the other two designs, but also that it communicated in some way that this was not a normal person. What I ended up going with was the idea that the character's body would have the same color and texture of bleached dead wood. That way it would still be somewhere in the ballpark of a human skin tone and she wouldn't look too different from the other two designs. And her clothes would be a little bit lighter, and they would somewhat resemble tree bark that is slowly peeling off of a dead tree. On a closer look, the grooves in her skin are meant to not be just random, but intentional, meaningful patterns, sort of like an equivalent to the tattoos I put on the first character design. And also, later on, I decided that it would be fun if they would be inlaid with gold, or like a gold-like material, to denote that this character is of a more elevated, important status and not just like some random forest fairy, you know? I also wanted to include the gems that are present in the other two designs. Just here, they aren't jewelry. They are a natural part of this character's body. They're the same color as their eyes and the bits of hair. And like with the second design, I spent some time trying to puzzle out what to do with that hair in the end. I had a very complicated idea, and ultimately I just kind of gave up on accurately representing that visually. What I really wanted was for the hair to have the texture and look of butterfly wings, being very smooth and somewhat shiny, while also being delicate and thin. Each strand would be like its own little wing, and they would be layered over each other to ultimately give the appearance of a full head of hair. Alas, I don't really have the rendering skills to really get that across, and I just also didn't want to spend hours upon hours trying to figure out how to get it right. So I just went for it, gave it my best shot. I don't really think it comes across correctly in the visuals, but that's, what I'm telling you about it. Maybe, with this knowledge, you can just imagine a better version, and you kind of get my vision. Even if I didn't draw it correctly, you still get it. But yeah, that's it. We're at the end of this little design exercise. I had a lot of fun with it, and I hope you also enjoyed yourselves watching it all come together. As I always say, I would love to hear what you think about these and which one of these is your personal favorite. I am very partial to the first one because it hits the nostalgia I feel for the original drawing, and it was such a smooth drawing process compared to the other two, but ultimately, I like all three pretty equally. There's just something to love about all of them. Anyway, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you around.